Thank you for your kind invitation. We have often heard the opening words of the Declaration of Independence. Those of my generation, and probably some of you, were made happily to memorize them. They go like this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the United States, these words have been part of our DNA as a nation since they were first penned in 1776. Since then, much ink and even more blood has been spilled in defense of them. If I could just focus in on one of those rights, because the right to life is quite self-evident also, but it's also the right to liberty. Liberty is the first of our rights of freedom, and it is the first in the history of democratic freedom. It goes back to the Magna Carta of 1215, and even before that, to the creation of the first human person by God, because these rights are natural rights and they issue from our rational human nature, which was created by God. The first ones to come to these shores braved rough seas in small crafts to secure the religious right of freedom, to worship and practice their faith as their consciences dictated. That is, the Pilgrims bound by the Mayflower Compact, or the mix of Catholic and Protestant settlers who arrived at St. Clement's Island in southern Maryland from England aboard the Ark and the Dove. They came at the invitation of the Catholic Lord Baltimore, who had been given a land grant by King Charles I, so that these people could live in religious toleration side by side with each other. Sadly, that was in 1649, and 10 years later, the winds of political change began to blow in England, and the right of religious toleration was removed from Maryland, and the established Church of England was made the official religion, and Catholic chapels were closed, and the people were forced to practice in the secrecy and privacy of their homes. This pretty much obtained until the Revolution of 1776. All of that is simply to underscore that religious liberty, if not valiantly protected, soon disappears. By the end of the 18th century, religious liberty had become the most fundamental and the most cherished of all of our freedoms. James Madison, who is sometimes called the father of the Constitution, described the freedom of conscience as the most sacred of all property. George Washington, our first president and founder, wrote, "The establishment of civil and religious liberty was the motive that first induced me to the field of battle." And in his famous farewell address, Washington insisted, quote, that religion and morality are the indispensable supports of our political prosperity. And John Adams, the second president, asserted, quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other." After the Louisiana Purchase from France in the 18th century, Thomas Jefferson assured the Ursuline nuns who had labored there in that French territory since 1727, serving mostly a non-Catholic population in schools, a hospital, and an orphanage. He said to them that the practice of their religion would be respected, even though now they were living within the boundaries of the United States. He wrote them that the principles of our Constitution were a sure guarantee, and that their ministry would be, quote, free to govern itself according to its own voluntary rules, without the interference from civil authority. In 1961, John Fitzgerald Kennedy spoke of the rights for which our forebears fought valiantly, namely the belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God, end of quote. It is therefore fitting that when the Bill of Rights was ratified, religious freedom had the distinction of being the First Amendment. Religious liberty is indeed the first liberty. The First Amendment guarantees, quote, that Congress shall not make any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What does that mean? It means that the federal government cannot establish a state church. The constraints are first on the government, not on religion. The First Amendment does not constrain religion or mute it in the public square or deprive religious people of a voice. Rather, the First Amendment first constrains government from interfering with the free exercise of religion. Why is religious freedom the first freedom? It is because if we are not free in conscience, dear people, and in the practice of our religion, then all other freedoms, whether they be the freedom of speech, the freedom of free assembly, the freedom of self-defense or to bear arms, these will always remain fragile freedoms. If citizens are not free in their own conscience, first and foremost, how can they be free in relation to others, or free with relation to the mighty state? If our obligations and duties to God are obstructed or impeded, or even worse, contradicted by the government, then we can no longer claim to be the land of the free or a beacon of hope to the world. Religious freedom is not only the freedom to worship quietly on a Sunday or a Saturday, it's the freedom to live your religion, to live out your beliefs and values in the marketplace. It's the freedom of conscience to do the works of faith, the works that faith calls us to do, without having to compromise that faith. Religious liberty has been the jewel, the great pearl of great price that has adorned the crown of liberty that welcomes to the New York harbor. It was a religious movement, we should remind ourselves, thus religious liberty, that spurred on the abolitionist movement, which put an end to slavery just prior to the Civil War of 1861. And it was a religious movement, and therefore religious liberty, in which the clergy were the prime protagonists that spurred on the civil rights push in the 1960s. Reverend Martin Luther King boldly said in those days, quote, "The goal of America is freedom." He went on to say that to call America to the full measure of that freedom is the obligation of all people of faith, but especially his own co-religionists, his own fellow Christians. In his famous letter from Birmingham jail, King went on to root all of his legal and constitutional arguments about the civil rights movement, about civil disobedience, about justice, in the long Judeo-Christian tradition that undergirds such matters. Religious liberty is that precious gem in our history that makes us truly a great nation, and one for which people will risk anything to come here, because social and economic prosperity flow from it. Yet it is the most cherished of freedoms, which sadly and tragically is presently threatened, not only abroad, not only in the Middle East, but here. Sadly, with the advance of secularization, God himself is made to take a back seat on the bus. There are many who see religion and people of faith as a threat to their own distorted view of human freedom. America has nothing to fear from religion. Nothing. For true religion seeks neither to be the master nor the slave of the state, but rather the conscience, the guide, and the critic of the state when the state needs to be criticized. On the contrary, we have everything to fear when religious liberty is undermined. For history has shown that all other liberties begin to fall with this most fundamental one. And when religious liberty is undermined here on our shores, you can rest assured that it is bound to be disregarded elsewhere. The Obama administration's new mandate requiring that health insurance in the Affordable Health Care Act provide for contraception, for sterilization, both pharmacological and surgical, as well as abortion-inducing drugs, presents a serious threat to the freedom of religion. That mandate requires religious institutions who hire employees, as well as employers of religious faith, to violate their conscience and to pay for these procedures when their faith teaches them that they are intrinsically wrongful. To use an analogy, if I might, without offending anyone, can you imagine the federal government passing a mandate requiring every kosher delicatessen to provide pork products because most people in the United States eat them? Can you imagine the federal government passing a mandate requiring every strict Islamic restaurant to provide alcohol against their religion because most people like to have a glass of wine at their meal? Most people would say, well, that's just not right. The government here is violating the free exercise of religion by interfering with other people's right to believe and to act according to their conscience. Affected by this health and human service mandate are not only churches, but a whole impressive array of religious hospitals, clinics, universities, colleges, schools, adoption agencies, overseas development projects, and social service agencies that provide assistance to the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the disabled, the dying, immigrants, and those with crisis pregnancies. Also included are millions of men and women of faith who own and operate their own personal businesses and are being forced to pay for insurance policies that provide for procedures which they know and believe are morally wrongful, including the provision for abortion-inducing drugs. And it will not end here, believe me. This is only the beginning. Government is never satisfied to limit itself. Government is never self-limiting. It only constrains itself at the behest of the citizens. We should not have to choose in the 21st century between being faithful to what we believe or obeying an unjust law. The so-called accommodation that the Obama administration has proposed is no accommodation at all. It is no compromise. It solves and changes nothing. It is merely an accounting gimmick, a verbal trick, a play on words that fools no one and insults the intelligence of Catholics, of Eastern Orthodox Christians, of Protestants, Jews, Muslims, and other people of faith, whose consciences are deeply offended by this assault on their religious freedom. In the end, the mandate still forces religious institutions, as well as individuals of faith, to provide for insurance policies that include measures that they know are morally abhorrent. The Obama administration claims that it is willing to exempt only churches that hire and serve their own believers and no one else. That would mean that the Good Samaritan and Christ himself would not qualify as religious enough to earn such an exemption, since they insisted on helping people who did not share their own view of God. Weighing in on this matter is not only Catholics and Protestants, but the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, and they said, quote, "Most troubling is the administration's underlying rationale for its decision, which appears to be a view that if religious entities are not insular but engaged with the broader society, those entities, those religious institutions, lose their religious character and liberties. Many faiths firmly believe in being open to and engaged with the broader society and fellow citizens of other faiths. The administration's ruling makes the price of such outward approach the violation of an organization's religious principles, and this is deeply disturbing." End of quote. My dear people, this is just one egregious example of big government's attempts to interfere with the natural right of religious liberty. There are many others that I could cite here this afternoon and unpack for you, but that would take quite some time. We don't have it. Suffice it to say that we have a big problem here, and it stubbornly refuses to go away. All of us need to open our ears and our eyes and realize that the growing trend of secularization in the country would like to see religion, all religion, subordinated to the political interests of an ever-growing secular state. The guarantee of the First Amendment is the only refuge that we have that prevents that from ever happening. God bless you.